This is the Late Round Podcast with your host, JJ Zacharisa.
What's up, everyone? It's JJ Zacharisa, and this is episode 634 of the Late Round Fantasy Football Podcast, sponsored by FanDuel. Thanks for tuning in. The NFL Draft is happening tonight, which means it's time for me to live in my office for about a week. Night one of the draft, I'll be on FanDuel's YouTube channel doing a live stream and reacting to the picks as they come in. Days 2 and 3, I'll be working on updating the prospect guide, and I'll be adding some commentary to the Late Round Fantasy Football Discord. I'm planning on having an episode with draft reactions early next week to talk about everything fantasy football and how the draft impacted fantasy football. And the prospect guide should be updated and sent out on Monday. That's the goal. That way you'll have what you need for your rookie drafts. That's what's happening on my end. I'm sure a lot of you don't really care about that and just want to hear this mailbag, though. I get it. Before getting into the mailbag, I just want to send a last-minute reminder about FanDuel's Mock the Draft free play, a fantasy contest that gives you a chance to win a share of $10,000 in cash. All you have to do is try to predict the top 10 players chosen in the draft in the correct order. Each correct selection will earn you 2 FanDuel points, while each selection within one pick of the correct selection will receive half a FanDuel point. Earn the most points, and you could be walking away with a $2,000 first place prize. For more details, visit FanDuel.com or download the FanDuel Fantasy app. Eligibility restrictions apply. The first question this week is from @AustinAbbottFF. Why doesn't anyone love Darnell Mooney? He's seriously got so much going for him. There's definitely love for Darnell Mooney. I think plenty of people like him. I just think it's a crowded position overall in fantasy football. You can make the case for a ton of guys in his range. At the beginning of the offseason, I thought Mooney was a sell. I thought a lot of people would be into him, and then his cost would rise a bit as a result of Allen Robinson leaving town. And I think there's plenty of reason to question whether or not he's got a super high ceiling in fantasy football, just given the type of receiver he is, the type of prospect he was, and his size. I also thought the Bears would do a little bit more in free agency than they did. Maybe not land a stud, but certainly land more competition than Byron Pringle. So I'd say that I've read this situation kind of wrong so far this offseason, because I don't think Mooney's really a sell anymore. Back in January, Mooney had an ADP of wide receiver 36, according to Dynasty League Football's startup ADP. It's now wide receiver 37, but there are 5 rookie wide receivers now ranked ahead of him that weren't in the player pool back in January. So maybe we could say that he would have risen to like wide receiver 32 or wide receiver 33. But that's not super significant considering the Bears haven't really done anything yet at wide receiver. And they lost Allen Robinson. And Darnell Mooney himself is coming off a really good second season. I thought there was a chance that we'd see him get into that wide receiver 25 range, but it has not happened. So it was a bad read on my part a few months ago. Now I think he's probably where he should be. Potentially he's undervalued. Mooney was not a bad prospect. I mean, from the perspective that he wasn't a day 1 or day 2 pick, yeah, I guess he was bad. But he had a really high draft capital delta in my model, which means my model thought that he was way underdrafted. And I think people were probably latched onto that capital. The fact that he went 173rd overall. That's playing a role in why he's ranked where he's ranked. There's no doubt. And it's fine to do that to some degree. Day 3 players do not hit very often. But you shouldn't ignore what he's already done. And what he's done, let's be honest, he's produced. Last year, Mooney had a target share per game north of 27%. And yeah, I know he didn't have much competition, especially if you buy into the narrative that the Bears were phasing out Allen Robinson. But what I've realized is that I can't sit here on this show and always say that targets are earned and then not use that same justification for Darnell Mooney. It's similar to Amon-Ra St. Brown last year. Yes, the competition was weak. But in order to see that kind of target share, it's still impressive, no matter the circumstances. And the thing is, the Bears' only out right now for 2022 at wide receiver is through the draft, more than likely. Like, that's how they add more pieces there. They could trade, but they're also rebuilding, so that's more unlikely. What that means is that Mooney's competition for 2022 is going to either be a player like Byron Pringle, or it's going to be a rookie or two. And remember, the Bears don't have a first-round pick. This is why my approach with Mooney has shifted over the last few months. Because he really could do something here in 2022, which would allow that dynasty value to increase year over year. Had the Bears showed any signs of wanting to improve at pass catcher with Justin Fields over the last couple of months, I'd probably not feel the same way. Because situationally, the Bears aren't the best spot for a wideout. The original question here says that, quote, he's seriously got so much going for him, which is sort of true because he's been good, but it's sort of not too. What he doesn't have going for him is general offensive situation. Mobile quarterbacks are not good for their pass catchers. Justin Fields hit 30 pass attempts in just 3 games last year. He played in 12 and he started 10. This is why there's some fragility here with Mooney when it comes to competition, and why I keep bringing up the lack of competition that the Bears brought in. Because for a player in an offense like this to actually thrive and give us usable fantasy numbers, he needs to see a pretty high target share. Mooney's a player who should be able to hit that 20% mark because he's good. But to get to 25%, 26%, we'd feel better about that if he had a situation similar to last season. Mooney would need to maintain the type of target share he was seeing per game last year, which is very difficult to do. But given what's happening with Chicago right now and the ammo that they have for this draft, in 2022, Mooney is set up very well. And I'm cool with buying into the short term, even with a bad offensive situation, because that situation can change after 2022. Whether it's Fields just getting better as a passer or the Bears actually moving on from him. The market seems to be showing that no one is buying into Mooney being a 25, 26% target share player this year. That's why my approach with him has changed. And my ranking with him has shifted up a little bit as well after more research and thought. I'm going to have a big rankings update after the draft for the late round fantasy football Patreon. We'll see where he settles with that after the draft. But I'm thinking he's probably more of a hold or even a buy than a sell, given how the market has reacted thus far this offseason. So I disagree that there's no love for Darnell Mooney. There is some love out there. But I do agree that he might be better than the Mooney manager in your league thinks. I adjust my stances when I discover new information or learn new information. Or honestly, when I just think about something a little bit more and a little bit deeper. I don't see any shame in that. And this is a good example of that happening. This next question is from BJ from Patreon. It says, hey JJ, what do we do with DJ Moore? We all know just how good DJ Moore is, but we also know how bad Carolina's front office is. Assuming they can make a trade for a Baker Mayfield or a Jimmy Garoppolo, I'd be a little more on the hold side. But even then, with either of those two in town, are we actually holding? I'm just a little nervous and don't want to get caught with a DJ Moore share after his selling window completely shuts. Thanks, and love all the great content you're putting out. Thanks. So I think the way to approach this question and answering this question is by analyzing that last point, because it's your biggest concern. You don't want to get caught with a DJ Moore share after his selling window completely shuts. But ask yourself, how would that selling window completely shut? It's if he has a bad season, right? Like a really bad season. Because I would argue that even if Moore has a season like he's had the last few years, he's not going to dramatically depreciate in value any more than someone else with his age profile. Moore is the only pass catcher in the entire NFL with at least 1,200 scrimmage yards in each of the last 3 seasons. He's a lock to see a high target share in his offense. And you could argue that it's tough for his offense to get dramatically worse than it was last year. In 2021, the Panthers were dead last in yards per play, third to last in total yards, and they were bottom 5 in total touchdowns. Despite that, he was still the wide receiver 25 in PPR points per game among wideouts with 8 or more games played. And according to Dynasty League Football's ADP, Moore went from wide receiver 9 in April of last year to wide receiver 13 in April this year. So yes, he saw a dip in value, but it wasn't that dramatic. It wasn't so insane given what he did last year. So it's hard for me to envision a scenario where he just free falls, or where you'd be caught holding Moore without any way of getting something for him. He's still just 25 years old. He just turned 25 this month. It's fine to think the upside may not totally be there, but you're also selling off a low point situationally. I don't think he's a buy because yes, the team just isn't built well right now for him to be a mega producer, but it's built well enough for him to see a large target share and continue to be a steady wide receiver too. That's why I don't think anyone with DJ Moore right now is going to have this big, massive regret after the 2022 season is over. This next question is from @SuaveSwaverson. It says, there seems to be a consensus 5 likely first-round wide receivers in this class. Wilson, Williams, London, Burks, and Olave. Outside of those 5, could you see another receiver in this class being viewed as the best looking back? If so, do you think a top landing spot will be needed to do so? So I'm recording this obviously before night 1 of the NFL draft. I just want to make that clear. But yes, this draft is pretty good at wide receiver at the top. I think those 5 have a good shot to be big fantasy contributors. But none of them are absolute can't miss prospects. Like they don't have some obvious profile like Jamar Chase where they're bound to be a wide receiver 1 in fantasy football. Maybe the easiest way to put it is that the most likely outcome here is that a lot of those guys are really solid wide receiver 2s. There's nothing wrong with that in Dynasty, but none of them are locks to emerge as wide receiver 1s. It's not that that can't happen, of course. I think some of them are more likely than others, like London and Burks versus the Ohio State guys. The Ohio State guys are likely more floor options than ceiling ones. But it's just that overall, this class seems incredibly solid at the top as opposed to incredibly elite, which means other wide receivers have an opportunity to at least join that group. And I think that George Pickens and Sky Moore are 2 players with that opportunity. Pickens has a size profile, and he can play that X role in an offense that generates a lot of fantasy points. And Sky Moore has the best production profile in this class, all while being an early declare, and he can play all over the field. He's coming from a smaller program, that's not great, but he's got what it takes to leapfrog some of these guys. So those would be my 2 picks outside the top 5, which is why they're ranked 6th and 7th in my wide receiver rankings. If some of the big 5 just don't live up to expectation, and some are just solid wide receiver 2s, then there's a chance that we see a player like Pickens or Moore jump ahead of them once it's all said and done. And I don't think it's necessarily dependent upon landing spot either. It's just how this class sort of looks right now. As I've said all offseason, it's pretty flat at wide receiver among the top 8 or so players. This next question is from @DFFFan. It says, I'm sitting here at rookie pick 102 and I feel like I'm in purgatory. 101 won't trade, and I feel like everyone knows 102 is a pick nobody wants or / is willing to trade for. Do we hope for the best with Malik Willis in Superflex leagues, or trade for a 2023 first plus something else? So again, by the time a lot of you listen to this, the first round's going to be over. But this is more of a game theory driven answer anyway. So where a player like Willis ends up going in the draft is kind of irrelevant. Pre-draft, the market makes a lot of assumptions, the fantasy football market. In this case, the assumption is that there won't be a clear-cut 102 pick in Superflex drafts. But that doesn't have to be the case post-draft. If a certain wide receiver falls to the right spot, if a player like Willis gets good draft capital, again, I have no idea where he's going to go, you really need something to go really well for one player to then all of a sudden feel good about that 102 pick. And maybe it doesn't happen, but think of it this way. The way the 102 is priced in your league right now, or the way that you're saying it's priced in a way where we're assuming there won't be any consensus 102 pick after the draft, meaning the pick is more likely to get more valuable after the draft than the alternative. It can still lose value if things go a particular way, but trading the pick pre-draft when your league mates feel this way means you're not playing into variance at all. You're making the same assumptions that they are. Now, I'm not necessarily telling you what to do here. I don't know what's being offered. It's impossible for me to give clear-cut advice here. My point is that when you're making trades pre-draft like this, always see what kind of assumptions are being made. And if there are a ton of assumptions being made on the negative side, you probably don't want to deal that pick when there's still a chance that it increases in value. Worst case, you're basically exactly where you are right now after the draft is over, right? That was kind of a mouthful, but hopefully it made sense. The last question this week is from @JK_no_kidding. It says, no rookie Packers receiver has gotten more than 450 yards since James Jones went for 676 yards in 2007. Should we avoid a Green Bay rookie wide receiver this year? So I think data like this is just littered with noise. Aaron Rodgers became Packers starter in 2008. So let's use that time as a reference point. Since 2008, as we know, the Packers haven't drafted a single wide receiver in the first round. They've selected 3 round 2 guys and 2 round 3 guys. So that's 5 day 2 picks across the last 14 drafts. The first wide receiver was Jordy Nelson in 2008. He had 366 receiving yards that year. He also played behind Greg Jennings and Donald Driver, 2 incredibly good wide receivers. So why should we have expected him to have a huge rookie season? Randall Cobb was drafted in the second round in 2011. He had 375 receiving yards while playing alongside Jordy Nelson, who ended up being a hit, Greg Jennings, and Donald Driver. Why should we have expected him to have a huge rookie season? Davante Adams was drafted in the second round in 2014. It's easy to forget this because he's so good now, but Adams had a really rough start to his career. He was also playing alongside Jordy Nelson and Randall Cobb. Why should we have expected him to have a huge and monster rookie season? The 2 round 3 wide receivers were Ty Montgomery, who wasn't even a traditional wide receiver, and Amari Rodgers, who didn't profile as a good wide receiver, at least according to my model. And they were 3rd round wideouts. Let's not pretend there's an investment there, or a massive one. If we focus back on those second rounders, yes, those second round wide receivers eventually became something while doing very little as rookies. But you need context. When they were rookies, they were playing with Pro Bowl caliber wide receivers. That's objectively not what we're looking at right now in Green Bay. I think Allen Lazard is a good value right now. But he's not Greg Jennings or Donald Driver. He's not Jordy Nelson or Randall Cobb, the guys that Davante Adams was up against as a rookie. Circumstances are totally different. If the player can play in this particular Packers environment, he's probably going to play. That's going to do it for today's show, though. Thanks to all of you for listening. If you've yet to subscribe to the Late Round Fantasy Football Podcast, make sure you are by searching for it pretty much anywhere podcasts can be found. And don't forget to follow me on Twitter @LateRoundQB. Thanks, everyone. Like I said at the top, I'll be getting tons of content done this weekend, so watch out for all of that. Otherwise, enjoy the draft, and I'll talk to you next week.